Let's talk about Octavia Butler. I mean, honestly, how could we not? She's one of the most visionary writers of the 20th century. Her novel Parable of the Sower, written back in 1993, feels eerily like a roadmap to what our world looks like today. And I really think is more relevant than ever now. The way it captures societal collapse amid climate disasters and economic upheaval, it's, well, killing. Let's take a look at this clip where Octavia Butler is interviewed. Butler was an award-winning sci-fi novelist. She wrote 2 books in the 90s, one of which is Parable of the Sower. At present day, her claim to fame is that her book appears to have forewarned us of events that are occurring today, like the California wildfires and the rise to power of a slogan-slinging president who embraces authoritarianism. Play this clip.
We're talking to Octavia Butler. Her latest book is Fledgling, wrote the Parable series as Katrina was happening, then the aftermath of Katrina. A lot of people were talking about Octavia Butler and how the Parable series made them think about that. Explain.
I wrote the 2 Parable books back in the 90s, and they are books about, as I said, what happens because we don't trouble to correct some of the problems that we're brewing for ourselves right now. Global warming is one of those problems, and I was aware of it back in the 80s. I was reading books about it, and a lot of people were seeing it as politics, as something very iffy, as something they could ignore because nothing was going to come of it tomorrow. That, and the fact that I think I was paying a lot of attention to education because a lot of my friends were teachers, and the politics of education was getting scarier, it seemed to me. We were getting to that point where we're thinking more about the building of prisons than of schools and libraries. And I remember while I was working on the novels, my hometown, Pasadena, had a bond issue that they passed to aid libraries. And I was so happy that it passed because so often these things don't. And they had closed a lot of branch libraries and were able to reopen them. So not everybody was going in the wrong direction, but a lot of the country still was. And what I wanted to write was a novel of someone who was coming up with solutions of a sort. My main character's solution grows from another religion that she comes up with. Religion is everywhere. There are no human societies without it, whether they acknowledge it as religion or not. So I thought religion might be an answer as well as, in some cases, a problem. And in, for instance, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, it's both. So I have people who are bringing America to a kind of fascism because their religion is the only one they're willing to tolerate. On the other hand, I have people who are saying, well, here is another religion, and here are some verses that can help us think in a different way, and here is a destination that isn't something that we have to wait for after we die.
Octavia Butler, could you read a little from Parable of the Talents?
I'm going to read a verse or two, and keep in mind these were written early in the 90s, but I think they apply forever, actually. This first one, I have a character in the books who is, someone who is taking the country fascist and who manages to get elected president, and who oddly enough comes from Texas. And here is one of the things that my character is inspired to write about this sort of situation. She says, "Choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by the opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. To be led by a liar is to ask to be lied to. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery." And there's one other that I thought I should read because I see it happening so much. I got the idea for it when I heard someone answer a political question with a political slogan. And he didn't seem to realize that he was quoting somebody. He seemed to have thought that he had a creative thought there. And I wrote this verse: "Beware, all too often we say what we hear others say. We think what we are told that we think. We see what we are permitted to see. Worse, we see what we are told that we see. Repetition and pride are the keys to this. To see and to hear even an obvious lie again and again and again may be to say it, almost by reflex, then to defend it because we have said it, and at last to embrace it because we've defended it, and because we cannot admit that we've embraced and defended an obvious lie. Thus, without thought, without intent, we make mere echoes of ourselves, and we say what we hear others say. Just one more comment on the human condition, I guess.
Sets this story in a dystopian 2020s. And if you read it, if you just look at the headlines these days, you can't help but notice the parallels. Wildfires rage across the landscape, threatening lives and livelihoods. I mean, California has seen its share of devastation, right? And then there's the erosion of basic societal structures that Butler describes. It's so vivid, almost unbearable. But it's not just fiction anymore. Her narrative feels like a reflection of everything we're going through today. And her protagonist, Lauren Olamina, gosh, she's like the heart of this story. Lauren is what Butler calls a hyper-empath, someone who feels others' pain as if it were their own. Now imagine that in a world tearing itself apart. That's Lauren's reality. But what's fascinating, I think, is how she channels that empathy into action through her philosophy called Earthseed. It's basically this idea that adaptability is key to survival, and change, whether we like it or not, is the one constant we have to deal with. And in so many ways, Earthseed resonates with the movements we see today for social and environmental justice. Think about it. Activists stepping up, communities rallying together to fight injustice, people adapting to what feels like a never-ending series of crises. Butler didn't just write about these things. She saw them coming. It's like she held up a mirror to society and she said, hey, this is where we're headed if we don't pay attention. Now, something that really stands out in Octavia Butler's work is her ability to dissect power, leadership, and honestly, the kind of emotional manipulation that can lead societies down dangerous paths. Take her depiction of these authoritarian leaders in Parable of the Sower. They thrive on fear, on this desire people have for a simpler, safer past that, let's be real, never really existed the way they imagine it. And here's where it gets, well, chilling. Butler wrote this in 1993, but it feels like she was sketching a blueprint for the rise of populist figures like Donald Trump decades later. I mean, think about Trump's whole Make America Great Again slogan. Esquire and The Root both noted how astonishing it is that Butler seemed to predict, almost word for word, the kind of rhetoric we'd see in his campaigns. What's fascinating, though, is how much of this is tied to nostalgia politics. This longing for an idealized past, it's kind of a trap, because it preys on frustration, fear, and even grief over the changes happening in society. It's not about fixing real issues, it's about controlling the narrative. And that's exactly the kind of dynamic Butler warns us about. She shows how populist and authoritarian leaders manipulate these emotions to consolidate power, often at the expense of truth and progress. And here's something to think about. NPR's analysis touches on this too, how Butler contextualized authoritarianism as not just acts of one individual, but as a systemic failure. It's the systems that enable this, right? It's economic inequality, environmental crises. I mean, even the kind of cultural divisions that make people cling to these so-called saviors who promise to fix everything. But the solutions? They're usually more about oppression than actual progress. It's a vicious cycle. So when you think about how figures like Trump gain traction, it's really about more than just the man himself. It's about the conditions we've allowed to fester. And what Butler understood so well is that leadership rooted in fear and nostalgia isn't leadership at all. It's exploitation, plain and simple. What makes Octavia Butler so timeless, so powerful, is the way her stories resonate with modern movements for change. It's like she had this innate understanding of both struggle and resilience. And today, you see her influence everywhere, especially among younger activists. NPR and Democracy now pointed out how her work has become a kind of guide or inspiration for those fighting for social and environmental justice. Her ideas challenge us, push us to think critically and act collectively. And, This generation, they're bold. They're not afraid to make noise, to disrupt systems. That's the kind of energy that Butler's work has helped spark. But there's also something familiar here. When you look at the civil rights movement of the 1960s, you see another generation of resilience, right? It was a time when people, folks who were tired of injustice, came together to demand real change. Butler wasn't just writing fiction. She was channeling history, showing us these waves of systemic oppression, and more importantly, the power of grassroots action to fight back. And that's the lesson. Resilience isn't just about survival. It's about thriving even when the odds are stacked against you. And okay, let me share something personal. One of my most meaningful advocacy projects was working in underserved communities to improve access to healthcare. The disparities I saw, gosh, it was heartbreaking, but it also lit a fire in me. We started small, organizing clinics, educating families on preventive care, and slowly we built a network, a team of passionate, committed people. It wasn't just about medicine. It was about empowerment. It reminded me of Butler's vision of collective action. Hers wasn't a world of saviors swooping in. It was about individuals stepping up, realizing their worth, and building something better together. That's powerful, isn't it? So much of this comes down to adaptability, like Butler's concept of Earthseed. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the only lasting truth is change. And it's true. Change isn't always comfortable. It's messy, even painful, but it's necessary. And Butler shows us through both her stories and the impact they've had that if we're willing to adapt and work together, change can be transformative, not just reactive, but visionary. That's what activism is, seeing the future and daring to build it no matter how impossible it seems. And that's a wrap on this episode of The Real 411. Thank you for spending this time with me, diving into Octavia Butler's incredible legacy and the warnings her work continues to send about our own society. I mean, honestly, discussions like these discussions keep me motivated because they're not just about learning. They're about acting, challenging ourselves to do better, to demand better. Now, I want to take a moment to thank each of you. Whether you've been tuning in from day one or this is your very first episode, your support, it means everything, really. If you enjoyed today's conversation, or if it made you think a little differently about the world we're living in, do me a favor, drop a comment, follow us on social media, and let me know what topics are on your mind. This show thrives on your engagement, your ideas, your feedback. And hey, don't forget to sign up for our email newsletter. It's the best way to stay in the loop. New episodes, exclusive insights, even some behind-the-scenes updates. And look, if you believe in the idea of independent media, content that isn't afraid to dig deeper, to maybe ruffle a few feathers, consider supporting The Real 411 on platforms like Substack and Fanbase. We've got both free and paid subscriptions because honestly, your support allows me to keep these conversations going, to keep amplifying the stories that truly matter. So as we close out today, just remember this. The story, it's never just the headline. It's the deeper layers, the context, the critical thinking that truly reveal what's at stake. Stay informed, stay bold, and most of all, stay real. I am Dr. Chelsea McGee, and I'll see you next time.